We're going straight up. This is Canada's, officially Canada's second tallest waterfall. The tallest is Bella Falls on Vancouver Island. A little bit taller, but apparently not as spectacular because it flows over the rocks. But I haven't met very many people who've actually been to Bella Falls because you have to catch a boat and then hike, usually overnight to get there. So important.
See that nice lake? It's a beautiful, eh?
That's Yoho Lake.
It's Yoho Lake? It says?
I've been to Vancouver for just a few days, but I came out here just because I've been working for Park Australia and somebody that I work with had a very small head-on collision with me. Ruined my car. So I had to either spend my money in a brand new car or ignore the problem for a while and go overseas. So I got a job in Lake Louise and came out here for that. And he's the main driving force of my being still here. Although I'm sorting out so unique is their soft body preservation. So here's another little picture of a different burgess shell fossil. This little guy here is called Canadia. It's a type of annelid worm, so related to earthworms, or if you guys snorkel or dive, related to things like duster worms and Christmas tree worms. And this is a beautiful example of some exquisite preservation where you can see the detail of the gills perfectly preserved in the rock. And we can even see detail in some of our burgess shell fossils where you can see what creatures ate over 500 million years ago before they died. And dinosaurs get all the glory, but how often can you see what a dinosaur ate? But to understand a little bit about how this might have happened, we need to travel back in time to over 500 million years ago when the burgess shell creatures were alive. And if we were standing in this exact same spot at that time, as we were talking about before, you'd need snorkels and flippers and all that gear to see the burgess shell creatures living here in a tropical ocean that was beautiful and warm. And so at that time we would have been about 400 kilometres off the coastline. In this nice tropical sea. Manitoba would have been our coastline. Anyone here been to Manitoba in the summer? No? Nobody?
Through it.
Through it?
Through it.
Well, normally when you say Manitoba and you say summer, first thing people think of is bugs. This is one time that you could have been to Manitoba and not had to worry about bugs, because we're talking about a time when in the world there was no life on land at all. So no plants, no animals, all life is just in the ocean. And the burgess shell creatures in this area were living along what they often call a limestone escarpment or reef. And we call it the cathedral escarpment. We'll actually see it nice and clearly today. The reef would have been somewhere between 50 and 100 metres depending on where you are. And lots of ideas have changed about the reef over the years, but basically they think that it was like a modern day reef community. Has anyone here been snorkeling? Yeah, or diving, yeah? So, when you're on the reef, there's so much life, just everywhere, but what happens when you swim away?
Nothing.
Nothing, yeah, it all disappears. There's just like a blue ocean, sandy bottom. And that's why they think the deposits here in the Rockies are very, very small and concentrated, because we're just seeing snapshots of this reef. And when we see our site today, the further you go away from the escarpment, the less fossils they find, so the less animals, and the quality lessens as well. And so they think that these creatures were living on the bottom, and we had maybe some big events, so maybe some earthquakes, some hurricanes, something that disturbed the sediment at the bottom of the ocean to bury them. Now what normally happens to things that die in the ocean? They fall to the bottom, they get eaten, and what else?
They make fossils.
If you're lucky, they make fossils. They decompose, yeah. So they don't last for very long, generally speaking, and that's why it's the hard bits that remain. But when this mud came along and buried them, it would have moved, as much as a meter it would have moved a huge quantity of mud, laying down as much as a meter or so at a time. And despite this picture, this is an old idea that the mud came off the top. Today they think it was more of a lateral mud flow, so moving slowly along the bottom, and actually would have taken days to cover some of the Burgess Shale animals. But because it was so deep, geologically speaking, 1 meter of mud over a few days is very, very fast. Sometimes it can take decades just to lay down millimeters. And because it was so deep, predators couldn't get to the bodies that were buried. And I don't know if you've noticed what we've been walking on, it's very kind of fine, clayey material. This is what they would have been buried in. So fine that it would have been very tightly packed. It would have entered all of their orifices, so into the mouth, into the eyes, between the gills, into their stomachs. And so tightly packed that there would have been very little oxygen for bacteria to break them down. And even for bacteria that don't need oxygen, like sulfur-loving bacteria, at that time the oceans are thought to have had very low levels of sulfur, so they wouldn't have broken them down either. And then we had this thin layer of a carbonate that was capping the top, kind of sealing it all in. And just those few things by themselves are thought to have been enough to create this incredible and very unusual preservation. Now we always talk about the Walcott Quarry and the trilobite beds. They're the two big sites here in the parks. But they actually were able to follow the cathedral escarpment through the parks and find lots and lots of other sites. So we're at a W, and you can see all the stars of some of the other sites that they found. It goes all the way through into Kootenay. So lots and lots of other sites, and there's even more than are marked on here today. So we're up here. They followed it. They've been able to follow it for about 40 kilometres, and then it disappears. So it disappears north and south eventually. So it would have been in the 70s. So at a certain point when the researchers were up here, they really wanted to excavate at the quarry, but Parks Canada said there's really no reason for you to. And so that's when they were kind of forced to look elsewhere. They followed this escarpment, actually because they thought it was protecting the site, and then found all of these other sites, found new species, and then made a case to come back and quarry again at the Walcott Quarry. And this is actually not just here in Canada either, it's actually a global phenomenon. We actually have Burgess Shale sites throughout the world. In particular, Changjiang is the oldest site in the world, so about 520 odd million years old. We have sites in Utah. We even have a site not far from where I'm from in South Australia, Emu Bay, which is interesting because they can start to see musculature being preserved in the rock, which is really exciting. Places like Greenland, Spain, and the sites are quite prolific. But you move those continents around to back where they were about 500 million years ago, and they're all along the equator in a similar kind of environment. Now there's a lot of things that we still don't know over the last century of research. Most of the work that they've done has been on describing, the showy stuff, so the new fossils that are kind of the weird wonders of the Burgess Shale. But in the last kind of decade or so, they've really started to look at how these animals were buried and what the environment was that they were living in at the time. And so they're just starting to get answers to that now as we move along with that research. Sadly though, today's walk is not a nice coastal walk, not nice.